This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
Welcome back to Markets Radar, your home for markets, everything from crypto, stocks, foreign exchange, IPOs, private equity, ventures, any market, and anything that I think would be relevant for you to understand what's going on in the world. And I give you my take on what it all means. Thank you so much for helping grow this show. This show is actually one of my top growing segments that I've done on Age of Jeremy, and it's all because of all of you out there listening to it, maybe sharing it with people, leaving comments. So thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. Before I jump in, I want to let you know that we also have another financial show that I'm on, the New Wealth Transfer Podcast. It's on the Coach JV YouTube channel. It's every Friday live, 12:15 Arizona time. And if you were like, oh, Jeremy, you do so much financial stuff, do you do anything else? I do. At 3:30 Arizona time on Fridays, I do a show called Mercury with podcasting and pop culture news. We had to restart our YouTube channel. We're at 126 subscribers. When we get that channel to 150 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away 2 books, Never Whistle at Night Part 1 and Never Whistle at Night Part 2. They are anthologies from indigenous writers about paranormal and maybe historically mixed in mythology stories for things that have to do with their ancestry, if that makes sense. You can check it out. It's by a gentleman named Shane Hawk. He's the one that put it all together. I was able to interview him at WonderCon in 2026. Was the first time that we did live running and gunning interviews, which we're going to be doing at Tucson Comic Con this year. But again, that's all about podcasting and pop culture news. So if you want something else besides financial stuff, maybe go and check that out. I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, make sure that you follow me on social medias at Age of Jeremy. And join my broadcast channel on Instagram. It's called Dope Insights and Updates. I will be building out a path towards that as well as I continue to build the Markets Radar, the Age of Jeremy brand. Eventually, this feed will be going over to its own feed, or this, show, Markets Radar, will be going over to its own feed. I'm still working on some stuff. So please make sure that you subscribe to the Age of Jeremy podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and then you will be notified when this moves. And I'd love for you guys to follow me so you can continue to get this amazing market news that I guess I shouldn't say amazing. I think it's amazing market news. I enjoy markets and I enjoy news and I enjoy talking and reading about it and giving you my thoughts on it. So to me, it is amazing. And we are going to get right into the news today. We have everything ranging from what's going on in the U.S. bond market into what Ray Dalio says you should be investing in right now instead of bonds as the economy kind of gets to a point where it might pull back next year. We're also going to talk a little bit about what's going on in North Korea after Donald Trump. The enemy, the villain Donald Trump did some stupid shit to South Korea and said, oh, I like that guy over in North Korea. North Korea didn't really give a crap about Donald Trump liking him or not liking him. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll jump right into this. We're going to start by unpacking some fascinating, chaotic, and revealing weeks in modern financial history. And that's the week of August 17th. I'm recording this on August 22nd, a week when the bond market decided to show U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is actually in charge. If you've been watching the markets lately, you know things have been incredibly tense. Earlier in the week, the yield on the 30-year Treasury bond topped 5.3%, hitting its highest level since 2007, while average market rates crept back up towards 7%. Investors were already on edge, actively trimming their holdings of longer-term bonds. Brian Jacobson, the chief economist strategist at Annex Wealth Management, was actually heading into a meeting on Wednesday when Secretary Bessent threw an absolute curveball at the U.S. bond market. The Treasury Department made a sudden, massive announcement. They were going to at least double their buyback program of older, off-the-run, longer-term treasuries, ramping it up from the current $2 billion to at least $4 billion. The maneuver was clearly not just a technical adjustment, but an active attempt to try to tame these climbing yields. Initially, the trades looked like a stroke of genius because the announcement announcement caught traders completely by surprise. It forced some to quickly unwind their bets on higher long-term yields, which triggered a massive rally and drove yields down sharply. It was a classic trader move, and Bessent, being a former hedge fund manager, certainly knows how to move markets in the short term. He even went on CNBC on Thursday morning to make his case, suggesting that the Treasury intervened because investors were operating on bad information that had pushed yields higher than was justified by economic fundamentals. So apparently the GOP, not to get too political here, doesn't have a problem with the government stepping in. So just keep that in mind, because when people need help, they don't want the government to do anything, but when it helps them, they have no problem intervening. But here's where the story gets a little bit more wild. The bond market is a $31.5 trillion behemoth, regarded as the world's biggest and most important bond market. You can surprise it for a morning, but you cannot easily tame it for a week. Almost immediately after Bessent's CNBC appearance, the impact of the move began to fade and long-term yields ticked up once again, because who gives a shit about Scott Bessent? To make matters worse, that very same day, the United States hit a grim milestone. Gross national debt surpassed $40 trillion for the first time in history, because I'm assuming that the buyback money came from what? People's debt, or debt in general. Think about the irony there. The Treasury is trying to buy back long-term debt to suppress yields, but to fund the scale-up buyback, analysts noticed they would likely have to issue more short-term bills. So they're going to issue more short-term debt, which increases our $40 trillion in debt, and then they're going to use that debt to buy back the long-term bills, or the long-term debt, to lower those interest yields. It's like shuffling credit card debt around while the overall bill continues to skyrocket, or as some people might look at it, it might be considered a Ponzi scheme, because, that's what the United States government does with cash. It's just a giant Ponzi scheme. By Friday, the market had completely wiped out Bessent's fleeting victory as investors gradually imposed their will. The yield on the 10-year Treasury note settled Friday at 4.737%, which was actually higher than the 4.695% it had started at the week earlier. Investors didn't just reject the intervention probably because it had to do with them issuing short-term bills to do it. They actively initiated a debasement trade. They dumped the US dollar, sending the Wall Street Journal dollar index down 0.7% over the week, and poured capital into alternative assets, sending Bitcoin surging by a massive 22%. So why did the market push back so aggressively? It's because doubling a technical buyback program does not resolve the deeper structural concerns that have spurred this months-long sell-off. If we look at what is actually driving the market anxiety, for starters, we have stubbornly high inflation. Bessent originally claimed that the administration would drive down yields by slashing the budget deficit to below 4% of GDP by the end of Trump's term. Instead, the budget deficit remains stubbornly stuck at around 6% of GDP, because it's probably harder than people think it is when they are actually trying to do it. Then you have geopolitical shocks. Earlier this year, a conflict where asshat Donald Trump, in this regard, the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, led to a shutdown of the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. As energy prices jump, investors quickly went from betting that the Fed would cut interest rates to betting that they would need to raise them. And on top of that, we have massive corporate borrowing. Tech giant hyperscalers like Amazon and Alphabet are issuing a deluge of corporate debt to fund artificial intelligence investments, which analysts say is actively crowding out investment in treasury bonds. So again, if you don't know, corporations, they get debt by issuing bonds onto the public market, right? And so when they issue those bonds, that's how they get cash to fund projects, just like the way maybe me and you and the normal folk could go around and get like home equity lines of credit or get loans or whatever the case is to fund the projects that we specifically have. So as these companies go and people want to be a part of AI, but maybe they don't want an equity play in it, maybe they want to be a part of the debt play in it, they would buy up that debt. And if they have a bundle of money that's associated with an amount of debt that they have, they'll take that debt away from that debt where they're putting it and put it into a different place. And that's what is being suggested here. And finally, there's a massive elephant in the room. The new Federal Reserve Chairman, Kevin Warsh, his approach to interest rate remains completely enigmatic. Rather than providing clear guidance, he has set up internal task force, leaving investors highly anxious about his policy direction and worried he might yield to political pressures from the White House to avoid raising rates. And again, if he's not putting out any information on what he might do, it means that it doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he wants to do. It means that he is going to be at the, helm of the White House's pressures on him to do what they specifically want. So hopefully he has some fucking integrity and he'll do what he wants to do, or what he believes, not maybe what he wants to do, but what he believes is the right thing to do, which would be to raise interest rates. As Gennady Goldberg over at TD Securities put it, this moment feels a lot like when the country received its first credit rating downgrade in 2011. We are seeing a fundamental erosion of confidence in our core institutions, from central bank to Congress and now to the Treasury itself. Now, is Scott Bessent's trader mentality fundamentally mismatched with his role as Treasury Secretary? Or did this week's bond market crash simply expose a deeper structural crisis that no government intervention can hide? It's really a mix of both, but the root issue is always going to be structural, in my opinion, when it comes to what's going on with the government. First, let's look at the leadership style. As Brian Jacobson pointed out, Bessent is looking at the world through a trader's perspective, which is focused heavily on short-term moves. In a hedge fund, success is measured by short-term market reactions, triggering a squeeze, catching short sellers flat-footed, and creating a temporary price pop. But managing the United States Treasury is a completely different game. You cannot trade your way out of a fiscal crisis. By announcing a massive long-term bond buyback without a genuine commitment to addressing the underlying debt, Bessent did what Brent Donnelly of Spectrum Markets warned against. He created the impression of a government backstop without being committed enough to sustain it, which backfired, and it made the Treasury look reactive and worried, which only highlighted the market's deeper instabilities. And so the point here is that, in my opinion, I think a lot of the times people assume because people have run businesses or they're businessmen, they can also run governments. Yes, part of the government is like running a business, but there are so many things that are different than that. So you have to have the best of the best at the helm. And what ends up happening is when business people like Donald Trump, and this goes for everybody knows that I fucking hate Donald Trump, but this goes for anybody that's in politics that hires business people, is they usually have it from a short-term mindset. Because what we have done over the last 30 or 40 years as it relates to business, especially companies that are involved with public trading in businesses, is always about profits. It's always about quarterly profits. And so that is a short-term outlook when we have a long-term fundamental problem inside of our government's monetary policy and I guess fiscal policy also that needs to be actually addressed and concerned. And when things like this happen, people that are in this game, they know what's going on, and it didn't make any sense to them. They didn't give a shit because they could tell that the Treasury didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Second, and most importantly, the bond market is screaming about structural issues that Bessent cannot fix with technical adjustments. You cannot buy back $4 billion in older bonds and expect investors to ignore a $40 trillion mountain of national debt. This is what our debt feels like. Oh, no, hold on. This is what our debt feels like. The debt goes... I don't have any other sounds still, so you get the ching ching every once in a while. Here it is again. It's probably super loud. I'm so sorry. I probably need to turn the sound down on it. I don't have headphones in, so I can't hear that sound because it's running through my mixing board. But you cannot buy back $4 billion in older bonds and expect investors to ignore a $40 trillion mountain of national debt, 6% budget deficit, and structural inflation driven by geopolitical conflicts because the ass had Donald Trump and massive AI corporate spending. The bond market acts as a truth mechanism. And this week, the market schooled Bessent by reminding him that the laws of fiscal gravity still apply. If the administration wants lower borrowing costs, they cannot rely on clever financial engineering. They have to address the deficit, restore institutional credibility, and provide clear monetary policy. And speaking of monetary policy, all eyes are now on Fed Chairman Kevin Warsh as we head toward the Kansas City Fed's annual Jackson Hole Symposium this upcoming Friday of the week, or next Friday. Wall Street is running out of patience with his vague task forces. If Warsh doesn't deliver concrete commitments to fight inflation, this wild week in the bond market might just be a preview of a much larger storm on the horizon. And I don't have a storm sound, so we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
The most memorable gifts aren't found, they're made. Zazzle is a custom marketplace where you pick any product, a mug, a card, a tote, a phone case, and make it personal. A photo, a name, an inside joke. The kind of gift that actually fits the person. That's what 30 million customers have been coming back to Zazzle for over 20 years to find. Right now, save 25% on your first order at Zazzle.com. That's Zazzle.com. Make it zamazing.
Now, if you thought the U.S. had a fun little ride this week, wait until you hear what just went down between the United States and our brethren up north, Canada. We are officially on the brink of an all-out spiraling trade war between two nations that exchanged nearly $900 billion in goods and services last year. Let's set the stage. On Friday night, which was August 21st, because I'm recording this on August 22nd. On Friday night, trade negotiations between the U.S. and Canada completely collapsed, and the U.S. response was swift and heavy. On Saturday morning, this morning, right before I started recording this, or earlier Saturday morning sometime, before I started recording this, the U.S. import taxes of 50% officially kicked in on hundreds of items imported from Canada. To make it very clear, when there are taxes on imports, the country does not pay the tax. The person that imports the goods into the United States pays the taxes on those specific goods. So if I went and bought if I had a business and I was buying a bunch of stuff from Canada and I imported, I would have to pay taxes on those goods. That's what an import is. It is a tax still on the American people. Tariffs, in my opinion, don't work. They only work when there are situations like in a wartime or something going along those lines and we're actually clashing with the other country rather than trying to be a dick, which is what Donald Trump is doing. We're talking about $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. Everything from plywood and liquor to electrical equipment and, yes, even hockey gear. What makes this move particularly shocking is the legal mechanism. The asshat Trump administration actually resurrected an Depression-era authority for the first time to bypass standard procedures and slam these 50% tariffs on Canadian exports because he's an asshat. But Canada isn't backing down. On Saturday, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada will retaliate with dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs on U.S. imports starting September 8th. Carney made it clear that Canada is taking this step reluctantly, acknowledging that it will inevitably raise costs and limit choices for Canadian consumers because Mark Carney's not a fucking asshat or a fucking idiot, but he stressed that Canada simply has no choice. This retaliatory punch will hit a massive range of American industries, specifically targeting steel, dairy, appliances, agriculture, equipment, pulp and paper, and electronics. So how did we get here? How did one of the most stable trading relationships in human history fracture so rapidly by a fucking asshole? According to Prime Minister Carney, the negotiations fell apart Friday night because the U.S. pushed for highly restrictive concessions. Specifically, U.S. negotiations demanded much tighter rules on how trucks were manufactured and sought to restrict Canada's sovereign ability to negotiate trade deals with other countries. This trade feud didn't happen in a vacuum. It has been building ever since July, when President Trump declined to renew the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement known as the USMCA, throwing the treaty into rolling reviews. The stakes could not be higher. The U.S. is Canada's largest export market by far, with Canada sending massive amounts of oil, vehicles, and car parts south of the border. But this is a two-way street. U.S. officials seem to have forgotten that Canada is also the largest buyer of U.S. goods and services outside of the European Union. So it goes the European Union, it's ginormous, I'm assuming, compared to Canada. Maybe I could be wrong because the countries are closer together. But there's the European Union, and then there's Canada. Canada is the largest buyer of U.S. goods and services. And trade needs to be free trade between our brethren, which is North America. That includes Greenland, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Rather than being separate, we need to all come together and build a strong American Union, I guess you could say. But so, and Ford's advice, while this is fascinating about the crisis, is how it is uniting Canada's fractured political landscape. Normally, Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Prime Minister Mark Carney don't see eye to eye. But this week, Ford wrote a letter to Carney explicitly advising him to execute a dollar-for-dollar retaliation. And this is what happens when you make enemies with people. When you become a villain to someone or an enemy to someone, it allows them to find agreements towards that enemy. It's that whole saying, like, the enemy of my enemy is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's exactly what Donald Trump is doing, because he's a fucking idiot and he's a fucking asshat. And Ford's advice got highly strategic. He pointed out that Canada holds immense leverage through its energy and critical mineral assets. Even more aggressively, Ford suggested that Canada should slap punitive tariffs on products coming out of the politically significant states for Donald Trump, specifically Florida, Texas, Iowa, and Wisconsin, and that would be hilarious, and they should totally do that. In Ford's own words, products from these states would face the full force of Canada's response. We are also seeing political rivals rally behind the Prime Minister. Jason Kenney, the former Premier of Alberta and a prominent conservative rival of Carney's Liberal Party, publicly praised Carney for walking away from the negotiating table. Donald Trump literally just united political parties in another country because he's a fucking asshat. Just let that sink in. This man is so bad at what he's doing and such a piece of shit that he essentially he brought people that maybe didn't hate each other, but didn't see eye to eye, didn't like each other, were against each other. He brought a whole country together against us. That's literally what he did in this specific situation. Kenny posted that Canada made a serious good faith effort to find stability, but declared we are not cravenly surrendering in the face of constant economic and political aggression. Meanwhile, the Canadian public is fully on board. A Ledger marketing poll published just a few days ago revealed that 56% of Canadians want their government to take a hard line and make no more concessions. The poll showed strong public breaking for aggressive retaliation, including imposing export taxes on the energy the U.S. buys from Canada and slapping special taxes on American services like Netflix. In fact, every day, Canadians are already retaliating in their own ways. Canadian tourism to the U.S. has fallen off a cliff since Trump returned to the White House, delivering a massive blow to border states and major vacation spots like Las Vegas. Now, this is not just a political spat, it is a full-blown economic collision. By using a Depression-era authority to impose aggressive 50% tariffs, is the Trump administration holding all the cards, or has the U.S. underestimated Canada's economic leverage and domestic resolve? The Trump administration is playing a highly dangerous game of chicken, and they have seriously underestimated Canada's willingness and ability to fight back, which is odd to me because just on the face of it, hockey seems to be like one of the most brutal sports. You would think that these men were, manly in the sense that the hockey is a pretty brutal sport. I mean, you can literally sit there and allow a fist fight to take place. Those are people, in my mind, off the gate, those aren't people that you really want to fuck with, because they're probably super compassionate up to a specific point, and then they're probably like, fuck you. From the U.S. perspective, the calculation was simple. The U.S. is Canada's biggest export market, so Canada would eventually bend under pressure. But by resorting to extreme Depression-era measures to slap 50% tariffs on $20 billion in Canadian goods, the U.S. has galvanized the Canadian public and unified Canadian politicians across party lines. When a conservative rival like Jason Kenney and a populist premier like Doug Ford stand shoulder to shoulder with a liberal prime minister like Mark Carney, you know the U.S. aggression has crossed a line. Further, again, he brought political parties together in another country. Furthermore, Canada has incredibly potent economic weapons. If Canada follows Premier Doug Ford's advice and weaponizes its critical mineral and energy assets, or targets key swing states like Wisconsin and Iowa, it will inflict severe localized economic pain on the American working class right when the administration can least afford it. By pushing too hard on truck manufacturing rules and trying to restrict Canada's sovereignty, U.S. trade negotiators have turned a standard trade dispute into a matter of national pride for Canadians. With the solid majority of Canadians demanding a hard line and already boycotting travel and goods, the trade war is going to hurt both economies deeply. If the U.S. escalates further when Canada counter tariffs land on September 8th, we could see a complete breakdown of North American supply chains. This is an escalating situation that every market investor needs to watch closely as we head towards September 8th. The era of smooth, predictable trade is officially over.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times.
On Friday, August 21st, 2026, the billionaire founder of Bridgewater Associates released a warning on LinkedIn that should make every single investor stop what they are doing and reevaluate their portfolios. Ray Dalio is warning that the United States is racing towards a massive debt crisis that could arrive in 3 years, give or take. In other words, we are looking at a 1 to 5 year countdown. Ray Dalio was the founder of Bridgewater Associates. He also has a great book that I recommend that everybody read on the changing world order and on his principles book. I mean, that's where I kind of created my principles from. I'm not as elaborate as he is. I'm still working on that. But if you don't have principles to live by, you're not going to be able to know how to react in situations to the best of your ability. So, for example, mine are compassion, integrity, leaving the world better than I found it, and building the tribe, growing the tribe, and protecting the tribe. If they don't meet those standards, then I don't do it, right? And so when I get pressed with a situation that I don't know how to respond to, I ask myself, is this compassionate? Okay, yes. Is it integral? If it is, then yes. If it's not, then I don't do it. If it is, then I move to the next one. Does this make the world better than I found it? If it doesn't actually make the world any better, or it makes a general person better, I don't do it. And then the last one is, okay, does this improve everybody in my life that's part of what I call my tribe or my clan? And if it doesn't, then I don't do it also. And so I think that you should all read those books, Principles and The Changing World Order, and they're books that we recommend in our 3T Warrior Academy. And again, if there's any Academy Warriors on here that are listening to this, please don't take my assessments of how I feel about Donald Trump and associate those with 3T Warrior Academy. Everybody's entitled to their own political opinions. I don't judge anybody that voted for Donald Trump. I just don't like Donald Trump, and I think that I would be doing a disservice to my principles if I wasn't educating people on why I believe Donald Trump is a bad person and he has no integrity. He's not compassionate. He's not making the world a better place. And for me, I feel that he's making it worse off for the people around me. And so that's why I'm very adamant on educating people on that we should not vote for him. That doesn't have anything to do with the GOP or the DNP, Democratic National Party. That's just something that I don't think that we should have him as a leader, because I think that he's just a horrible person. But so don't take what I'm saying as a reflection of any of the businesses that I am a part of. As Dalio's advice to survive this is incredibly direct. So the advice that Ray Dalio gave is to sell your bonds, put 10% to 15% of your money into gold, and along with, and this is the one that I'm excited about, along with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin went up this week. I made an extra, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 in a couple of days. Oh man, you just keep dollar cost averaging into that Bitcoin, and you will be good. To understand why Dalio is sounding the alarm, hold on, this is what I had this week. Little ching, 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 ching. To understand why Dalio is sounding the alarm, we have to look at the terrifying map behind the U.S. balance sheet. Dalio estimates that the U.S. government will bring in about $5.5 trillion in revenue this year against $7.5 trillion in spending. That leaves an absolutely massive $2 trillion shortfall. $2 trillion, twice the amount of the highest value of Elon Musk's net worth. We are in a shortfall for the year. As Dalio outlines in his book, How Countries Go Broke, The Big Cycle, we are watching a classic debt cycle crisis unfold in real time. And real quick, the changing world order goes through how countries grow and then collapse over time. And he makes a very big argument for the fact that the United States will eventually not be the leading player in the world economies, I guess. When government debt balloons, rising debt service costs eventually collide with a lack of investor demand. So think about it. Who is left to buy all of this debt? Japan, which is America's largest foreign creditor, has actually been actively selling off U.S. bonds to support its own currency, the yen. According to Dalio's framework, when there aren't enough buyers for these mountains of government debt, governments are forced to face a painful choice. They must either accept higher interest rates or have their central banks print money to buy up the debt. If they print money, it weakens the currency and fuels domestic inflation. And that is exactly why Dalio expects what he calls non-government produced monies like gold and Bitcoin to do exceptionally well. We are already seeing the market front run this warning. Just as Dalio comments went live on Friday, gold jumped to its highest level since May. And I'm so happy because I have gold. And you should have gold too, while Bitcoin surged past $77,000. And if you remember, I had an entry point at $62,000 and I put money in at $62,000. So from that point, I put in a certain amount of money and Bitcoin has gone up to $77,000. That's why having an entry strategy, which you can get at merlincrypto.com, is so important. Heading toward, and so Bitcoin surged past the $77,000, heading towards its biggest weekly rally since 2023. Investors are actively fleeing fiat systems because the fiscal strains aren't just limited to the US. Countries like the UK, China, and Japan are facing very similar structural crises. To avert this disaster, Dalio says we need a drastic change in course. He advocates cutting the budget deficit in half, bringing it down to 3% of GDP from its current level of around 6%. But doing that requires a highly unpopular combination of spending cuts, higher tax revenues, and lower interest rates, which if you watch the New Wealth Transfer podcast on Friday, I went on a rant about that. That is what we need to do. If Ray Dalio is correct that the U.S. is facing a structural debt crisis within the next few years, can the policy solution he proposes, cutting the deficit to 3% of GDP through spending cuts, tax hikes, and lower rates, actually be implemented in today's political environment, or is a currency weakening inflation spiral now inevitable? I don't think anything's ever inevitable. Dalio's proposed policy solutions are highly logical on paper, but they're almost politically impossible to execute in the current environment. So let's look at the tools he suggests: spending cuts, tax increases, and lower interest rates. In a deeply polarized political climate, passing meaningful spending cuts alongside tax hikes is a non-starter. No administration wants to tell voters they are cutting services while raising their taxes. Furthermore, lowering interest rates is incredibly difficult to do when inflation remains structurally high. The Federal Reserve lowers interest rates prematurely to help the government reduce its interest service costs. They risk reigniting the inflation fire but the inflation fire would be offset by the higher taxes. Because the political path to reducing the deficit to 3% of GDP is so narrow, the second path Dalio describes becomes the path of least resistance. The government will likely continue to issue massive amounts of debt, and when investor demands fall short, especially as major foreign creditors like Japan continue to sell off treasuries, the central bank will ultimately be forced to step in and monetize that debt. This means that the debasement trade is not just a temporary market trend. It is a structural necessity for survival in a debt-heavy world. When the supply of government fiat currency is constantly expanded to inflate away the debt, hard assets and decentralized alternatives are where the smart capital will flow. When you are a traditional investor who prefers gold or a modern investor looking at Bitcoin, Dalio's message is clear. Holding long-term government debt is a losing game, and it's time to diversify into assets that no politician can print, and those are gold and Bitcoin.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
I'm Glenn Washington from Snap Judgment, the storytelling podcast from KQED. Imagine an iconic piece of paradise overrun by one of the most horrific fires in recent memory. Everyone flees, everyone, except one person who decides to fight the flames alone. The moment when nature, institutions, and technology fail at the exact same time. That's All Systems Down, a new Snap Judgment miniseries from KQED. Tap to listen now.
We're zooming over to North Korea-ish or across the Pacific. And if you remember, I think it was on Tuesday or maybe last Saturday, I put out a Markets Radar where I talked about how Trump was dissatisfied with the amount of money that we were spending on the troops that were in South Korea, even though South Korea was paying us for those, or maybe the price was too low. And so they're going to cut those training sessions with South Korea and Seoul in regards to North Korea getting better at their nuclear program. And so essentially Donald Trump was saying that we shouldn't be worried about North Korea because, him and Kim Jong-un are on good terms. But that may not be the case based off of a response from North Korea this specific last week. This week, the annual Ulchi Freedom Shield, that's what it was, the joint military exercises, is a massive 11-day drill designed to sharpen South Korea's defense against North Korean military confrontation. It got cut short by President Trump, asshole, sudden order. The drills, he stopped the drills, which were originally slated to run for nearly 2 weeks, were halted 6 days early, ending on Friday. Trump over the weekend defended the decision, calling the joint training costly, inappropriate, and hostile to a North Korea that he described as having been unthreatened and respectful. At the White House, he went even further, stating that these massive war excesses were insulting to Kim Jong-un, who he noted has been very well behaved during his term. The administration is now actively pushing to arrange a high-stakes face-to-face meeting between the two leaders as early as this fall. But if the White House was hoping for a warm embrace from Pyongyang in response to this major concession, they received a freezing cold bucket of water instead, because who gives a fuck about Donald Trump? On Wednesday, Kim Jong-un's young sister, Kim Yong-jong, issued an icy statement carried by North Korean state media. She dismissed the early end of the drills as an empty, ineffectual goodwill gesture that didn't even merit interest or comment. While she did know that the personal relationship between her brother and Trump remains excellent, and that Kim Jong-un Un holds good memories and feelings toward Trump, she flatly declared that the U.S. hostile policy remains unchanged. She also pointedly denied Trump's claims that the two leaders had been active in recent communication, because Trump just fucking lies all the time. What makes this unilaterally scaled back so alarming to observers is the context in which it occurred. First, the sudden decision to cut the drills caught South Korean's government completely by surprise, according to the South Korean foreign minister. Second, it comes at a moment when the U.S. military presence in Asia is being stretched thin because of the ongoing war involving Iran. The U.S. has already shifted missile interceptors and other key military assets from South Korea to the Middle East, and a critical American warship is currently heading in the same direction. Furthermore, the concessions first approach is taking place while North Korea is arguably in its strongest strategic position in decades. Thanks to rapidly tightening defense ties with Russia, Pyongyang has deployed 15,000 North Korean troops to the front lines in Ukraine since 2024. So North Korea and Russia are building a stronger alliance. We are consistently uniting people because, well, this one specifically isn't because of Trump. But in exchange, Vladimir Putin has supplied Kim Jong-un with hard cash, diplomatic cover, and advanced weapons technology. Armed with this newfound leverage, North Korea is no longer negotiating a denuclearize. Instead, they are demanding global acceptance of their nuclear arms program, which it's odd to me that one country is okay to have these nuclear arms because we don't want to face the fact that North Korea should be essentially, I don't know, managed in some way, not going deep there. But we're not allowing Iran to make one when they have stated that, one, they don't have one, and two, it was for, electricity purposes and so forth, which could be what it was actually for. But who knows? Again, I'm not behind the walls. The military probably has intelligence, obviously, that I don't know. But the sudden shift in military posture has triggered fierce blowback in Seoul. And so, by unilaterally cutting joint military exercises to appease Kim Jong-un, is the Trump administration opening a genuine window for a historic peace deal? Or is it undermining our alliance with South Korea while getting absolutely nothing in return? The hard truth is that the administration is giving up vital strategic leverage for what amounts to a diplomatic illusion. By halting the Ulchi Freedom Shield drills 6 days early, the U.S. did not just disrupt a routine exercise, they disrupted a critical multi-nation operation involving 23,000 personnel that was actively practicing to counter highly modern, evolving North Korean threats, including drones and GPS disruption. South Korea's opposition's Conservative Party put it perfectly. The fact that a crucial active defense alliance exercise can be altered midstream by a single order from a dick president, they didn't say dick, I added that, is a dangerous precedent that severely undermines the credibility of the U.S. security umbrella, because the security of the U.S. security umbrella is garbage underneath these fucking leaders. So vote them out. Even worse, I guess Trump can't, well, who knows, but Trump can't come in, but get MAGA out of this fucking fuck MAGA. Even worse, Kim Yo-jong's response exposes the core flaw of the administration's personal diplomacy. While Donald Trump relies heavily on his excellent personnel connection with Kim Jong-un, Pyongyang operates on cold, hard structural calculations. They recognize that a temporary reduction in drills does not change the core geopolitical stance of the United States. With North Korea receiving cash and advancing weapons technology from Russia in exchange for 15,000 troops, Kim Jong-un has less incentive than ever to make concessions. They are playing a long game, using their alliance with Moscow to solidify their status as a permanent nuclear power. For the U.S. to offer major unilateral military rollbacks while our forces are already being diverted to the Middle East sends a signal of weakness, not of strength, because I'll digress on my feelings on Trump. If we do see a summit this fall, the U.S. will be negotiating with an emboldened nuclear-backed North Korea that knows exactly how to extract concessions without offering anything of substance in return. So again, guys, I apologize for my anger at the administration. It's just, I feel like, I don't know, two orangutans and a monkey could do a better job than the people that are in power in the United States. And again, I'm not saying that this should be a Democratic Party or a GOP party. My specific problem is specifically with the MAGA leadership, not people that are following, because I can see why the MAGA administration or the Trump administration can say things to people and make them believe certain things that I personally don't think that are true or valid, and get them to follow them, because that's what I guess dictators do. And with that, as I always say, be thankful, grateful, and kind, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye.